Well, this is such an interesting, beautiful feast of the Transfiguration. Jesus is striving to, really get the point across that, he is the only begotten Son of God, and listen to him. And so you have the two central figures of the Jewish Testament of Moses, the lawgiver, and Elijah, the one who's to come at the end of time. And here they're both talking with Jesus. And so then you have the voice come from the cloud, which is the voice of the Father saying, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Now you would think, what further need have we of witnesses, right? Like this should do it once and for all. Not so much. You think Peter was standing there at the foot of the cross going, "Don't worry, I know this is the Son of God. Because God the Father spoke to us when we were on Mount Tabor. Stand hold, people of Jerusalem. Victory is coming." No, he ran away. He ran away. I don't mean to put words in his mouth, but if you've ever watched Cecil B. DeMille and seen Charlton Heston as Moses, you can imagine Peter might be a little bit more triumphant. It doesn't work that way in real life. What is real life like? Well, I'll tell you what real life is like. At the beginning of Mass, I was thinking to myself, something's different. Something's different. What is it? I'm missing something. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was until just a little while ago. I'm missing the deacon. And he's the one who's giving the homily. So a little bit of a conflict there. He's preaching at all my masses today, and I had 4 yesterday, and I've got 3 today, 8, 10, and 12, 15. Not 4 masses, but the 4 o'clock. So what can I tell you that would, instead of just trying to come up with something, since you obviously didn't like my Peter imitation, and one is this. One time at a children's mass, they had the gospel passage of, Bartimaeus the blind man. I remember what happened is there's this crowd passing by, Bartimaeus is begging, and he hears all this noise, and he says, "What's going on?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." Now, unlike the apostles, they didn't seem to keep in mind who Jesus was after the Transfiguration, except for John, who stayed at the foot of the cross, and Mary Magdalene. Bartimaeus calls out, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And they're telling him, "Be quiet, be quiet." And since it was a children's mass, I said, "Boys and girls, do you ever have anybody tell you to be quiet?" And they immediately all went, "Oh yeah, right, yeah." And I said, "Who tells you to be quiet?" And one little kid came up and he says, "My father." I said, "Why does your father tell you to be quiet?" "It's because the game is on." And when a little kid had her hand up, and I said, "And what about you? Who tells you to be quiet?" She says, "My mom." And says, "Why?" She says, "The baby is sleeping. The baby is sleeping." I said, "Oh, very good." And I'm feeling really good about this. And I'm thinking, this is going very well. And then I said, okay, one more. And a little boy had his hand up. I said, "Who tells you to be quiet?" He says, "My mother." And says, "And why?" He says, "Because she's had it up to here." And all the parents rejoiced except for his mother, who kind of just slunk down in the pew. But there's 2 things in life that are really important to us. One is listening, and the one is also sometimes when to be quiet. And there are times in your lives and our lives where we are so confronted with what seems to be everything falling apart that we find then that we are stilled into a silence by the fraughtness of it all. Sometimes people will say something like, "Well, it's in God's hands now." My father would tell me, he says, when people would say that, he'd say, "Well, whose hands was it in before? Did we just suddenly decide to give it to God? Aren't all things in God's hands at all times?" And so there's a point where when we're confronted with an inability to figure things out or put things together, in that silence of no longer having what seems to be any power or any solution, we come to learn something very important. We are in God's hands, always. And this is the thing I would like to leave for you today with regard to what is the main thing for the Transfiguration. It was to believe, have faith, trust. Jesus reveals just a part of his glory, the radiance of the of his bright eternal existence. And it was just meant to give the disciples a little bit of hope, so when push came to shove and Jesus was put to death, he then says, don't tell anybody about this until the Son of Man rises from the dead. They didn't tell anybody about it, but they also didn't seem to have taken it to heart. And how much better wouldn't our lives be if we really believed a little bit more than we tend to do on a regular day-to-day basis? Lots of times, I had a parishioner who would say, she had a bumper sticker and it said, I don't believe in miracles. She says, I rely on them. I don't believe in miracles, I rely on them. A couple days ago, I was in the hospital. One of our dear parishioners, Elvira, has been stricken and she's in a precarious situation. And she was up on the 3rd floor, and down on the 2nd floor was her daughter getting ready to give birth to the 11th grandchild. And there you have new life and perhaps a life that's ending. We pray not, we hope not. But we are convicted in our standing there between, new life and perhaps a rebirth. That God is present in both extremities. And that's something that maybe the Transfiguration cannot speak to us so much today. But certainly for me in that hospital, listening to the family pray around their mom, and also listening to them rejoice at the birth of little Zelda Lee, the beautiful baby, you have to be struck with the holiness of it all and with our neediness in it all. We come from God, we return to God, and in between being born and being reborn, God is with us in all things, in all things.